Hey everybody, I am here with Audi. You probably have seen him recently on the Digital Foundry videos, most especially the DF retros, but I'm sure he has quite a storied history beforehand. And lucky we get a chance to hang out and talk. So how you doing, man?
Pretty good. Finally, I think this is the most hotly anticipated interview by no one. But we've been trying to set this up for like what I think first time asked was like 4 months ago, 5 months ago. I
Something like that.
really have to apologize. I just didn't have time or the technical requirements because my setup busted. So
Oh man, well, no problem. And there's been a bunch of people that we were pretty excited to do interviews, and they never happened. And it was never there was never a thing. There was never an argument. It was just exactly like you described. Like first one of us gets busy, then the other one, then something happens with the setup. So hopefully all that stuff will clear itself up, and we could all go and do a bunch of these whenever we feel like it now.
oh, hopefully I wouldn't get too excited though, considering who you're interviewing. But I'll do
Aw.
my best.
Nah, I'm sure this is going to be awesome. Any fan of a CDI at the very least has to have some interesting things to say.
We all live storied lives when having that console. It's like a daily struggle.
So for all the the fellow podcasters listening, what happened with your setup that cut you short from doing those?
Well, I think my webcam was like from the medieval ages. I think that was the number one problem.
Huh.
It ran on string and hope, and just cut short, so we couldn't really do video.
Mm.
And then I packed my microphone, this one, the Samsung COU1. I packed this down in a sock and left it at John Lemon's place. And then COVID happened. So it kept warm in that sock for a long time. I have washed it, though. Luckily, there's no smell-o-vision for you, but I did wash it before I started using it.
That's funny. So you just used that to just to protect it while you were storing it, and then just forgot about it, right?
Pretty much. I'm not actually. Maybe there's a longer story to why it ended up in a sock. I would have to ask John about that. A lot of things happen when I'm there, but yeah, let's just assume it was sent into that sock for protection.
Yeah, I had a trip years ago. I used to have this job where I got to travel all over the world, which as a kid I never went anywhere, so I was always thrilled about it. But I got to be pretty good at the whole routine and never checking a bag and all that stuff. And there was one trip that was 2 weeks long that just because I was stubborn, I was like, I'm not going to check any bag. So the first trip from home to the first location, I was literally stepping inside a suitcase, smushing all my clothes down. And then after the first location, I was like, I can't even get the clothes back in here. And how do you mix dirty and clean? And I just happened to pick up a couple of prototypes at a fab house. So I wrapped them all in my dirty laundry and shipped them back to the office. And
Oh
the
no.
crew back at the office was like, "Hey, are those prototypes here yet?" I'm like, you might want to wait for me to open that box. I
Yes.
don't think you're going to be the one to open that packing material, should we say? So, yeah, that was
Oh,
pretty
I thought you used to work as a Chippendale dancer. That's the rumor I heard.
big and tall size
Oh,
only.
yeah.
But
All right. All right.
no, and I really stink at dancing, so it's embarrassing. The fact that I could play guitar is shocking to me because I have no rhythm whatsoever when it comes to dancing.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat. I play guitar too, and
Oh,
I do
nice.
not dance. So
So, where did you get started in all of this? I've heard you talk about some of the things you were involved in, and some of the people that you know. Like, what's your origin story? Like, how did you even get into all this crazy video game stuff?
well, for video games, I mean, I've been into it my whole life. Obviously, I
Mm,
grew up with the Micros and the NES and an MSX somehow, and so I just had like a large library of video games to draw from when I was a kid. But the one thing I really loved more than anything was video game music, and like even before I started like liking the games themselves, the video game music by like Chris Holzbeck and Ben Dankleash and these people like inspired me as a kid. Like they really, when I was like out and about running in the forest and stuff, that was the music I was imagining, not you know whatever. I don't know what my friends were imagining, but I was always playing like I was a Turk and soldier or these kinds of things.
hmm
So yeah, my love for video game music was kind of what spiraled me into. My dad's a history writer and a kind of accomplished writer here in Norway. And so I always had a kind of fascination for history. So because of him and the genes that he gave me, good, both good and bad, uh, like the ability to kind of remember and to accumulate information and share information was always very important to me because that's what he did with World War II. But I was like, well, people have heard about World War II, but they haven't heard about, Daytona, USA or Turkey too. So that was kind of my field. And so even at a young age, I became kind of like encyclopedic for my age. And that kind of led me. I went to art school, which is always a great decision to do in life. And but it had nothing to do there. It was just kind of not the talent that they were looking for. But I had a great imagination and a great memory, so they were just kind of like, what if we set you up with some kind of internship with a game company? And that's how I landed at Funcom when I was 17. So I was an intern at Funcom at 17.
So what's Funcom?
So Funcom was the developer behind like Anarchy Online, Age of Conan, and Longest Journey. All these games. I do remember my first day there, though. I don't think they liked me very much because they were showing me. I actually arrived the very first day they signed the Conan contract, so everyone was drunk and just smashed because they'd been up all night waiting for the facts. And so I came in the door. I had a wonderful guy called Didrik showing me around. He was like, "Oh, so here's where we recorded the booth for like the Longest Journey dialogue, and here's this and here's that from like Anarchy Online." I was like, "Okay, like I'm not too much into PC stuff." But then they had like in the corner in this dark room, they had this IKEA glass display, and in there was Sega CD and Super Nintendo games that they had ported and worked on. So they had like the Fatal Fury Special Sega CD case and the Winter Gold on Super Nintendo. And I ran over and I was like, "Oh my God, you worked on the Sega CD?" And they were like, "Why the can I curse? I don't know if I can curse, but they were just
of
like,
course, swear it up if you'd like. No problems
what
here.
the fuck do you want to know about that for?" It's like, no one plays that anymore. It's like, no one plays this, motherfucker. No one plays like Anarchy Online. No one cares about that. Like, how was Samurai Showdown? How was that the port? And they were not too impressed by my insistence of playing and talking about the Sega CD. So I was there for a little bit. I wasn't at Funcom for long, but that was my entry into video games at 17. And then from there, officially, I started just kind of working in journalism. I started working for websites and eventually landed at places like Destructoid and these places people might remember me from. And then Hardcore Gaming 101, that was pretty well acclaimed there for a while. And what I kind of had a knack for there was that I always made these huge, sprawling retrospectives of retro games. Like it would be the entire series of Ninja Turtles games or the entire series of Asterix game, and it would include everything. This might sound a little familiar considering who I work with these days, but it was very kind of like in-depth, talking to the developers, talking to the composers, and technically kind of inspecting these games, which wasn't the norm at this time. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of journalistic work in video game music in Japan because I was just someone that kind of had, some knowledge of this. And not too many people, it wasn't that I was the only one, but I was the only one crazy enough to try to reach out and communicate to these PC98 people and whatnot and get some answers. So I started doing a lot of articles and interviews with them. So I just kind of grew into being this, video game music guy on the internet, I suppose. And that was my start.
It's funny. A lot of the developers I've contacted over the years to do interviews with and stuff, they were kind of surprised that people would want to hear from them. And on the flip side, everybody that watched the interview was like, how come no one's interviewed this guy before? Guy, girl, whatever. Like, how, like, I guess people just assume that people with talent, there's always people lining up to interview them, including other interviewers, by the way. So I'm wondering if, like, by the time I got to some of these pretty amazing developers, that I just, other interviewers probably just thought somebody else had already done it and never reached out or anything like that. But it's kind of funny because there's so much talent out there and so many awesome people in the scene, and it's really cool to be able to actually discuss all of these and really get get people's stories out there and how they started and how they're able to do all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean that was basically how I felt about it too. This was like what I'm talking about now is like 2004, 2005, so it was pretty early on, and I had such a fascination for especially like the Japanese home computer scene in the 80s and 90s because the type of composition and development was completely different from console. It was much more personal. It was much more layered, I felt, and there was stories here that was not being shared. And of course, language barrier was one of them. And still to this day, my Japanese is not as good as it should be, but I try my best. But just like you said, whenever I did get in touch with these people, they had kind of left the industry or just kind of figured that, their work, especially in Japan, this is always kind of what I face. Is that like, oh, I made this, 25 years ago. No one cares about this. And it's like, absolutely they care about it. And I care about it. And this is why I want to speak with you. And it's always interesting, though, because when you do get them to open up, they light up. It's clear that was important to them. And it's when you get those moments that, because you can't fake that, when you get that kind of genuine reaction, that genuine care and love for what they did, this makes for a good interview, a good article. And this was always why I sought out. And luckily I could seek that out in Japan. So I got, lucky back in the early 2000s.
That's pretty awesome. So what, you mentioned doing some journalism stuff. I always kind of curious what people's definition of a journalist is. Does it somebody with a degree? Is it just somebody that's posted articles that went public?
So I have an art degree, but I actually, because an art degree means as much as the CDI does in the grand scheme of things. So actually my daytime job here or in Europe, like after school for me, was working for the newspaper. So I never and this was through my dad. It was just, he's like, I can get you a job at the newspaper and you can write. I was like, oh, I don't want to do the same as you. And but I did what I did back then. And then I've always been a very critical person of myself, and I kind of realized that I'm sitting here, I'm not getting anywhere. I need to start traveling. I need to start kind of expanding who I am as a person. So when I was 20, I started traveling. So I went to the US for the first time, and that was an interesting trip. And then ended up in Brazil. And really what I discovered was that, for one, I was very lonely internally because whether or not people could speak English or my Portuguese was improving, the type of people we were very different. So I had to kind of speak to someone, and what I found therapeutic was to do writing. Just write, whether or not it was a diary entry or was an article, whatever. It became sort of, for me, a type of communication. And so this is how in Brazil at the time then I started writing about music, and I had a partner at the time that helped me translate into Portuguese so that it can be published. And from there, I got kind of discovered a little bit from the websites in the US and started writing for them, and then also like Retro Gamer in Europe and other magazines like that. So yeah, it was just throughout the 2000s, this is a gradual climb where people were like, there's something about this dude, he's a little bit strange, but he knows his stuff and he can write okay, so let's have him do something. And then it was also my desire to just get these stories out and consolidate video game, especially video game music. This is very important to me, was to kind of get the video game music information centralized and communicate properly, because this was so often reported wrong. I found that like composers were not correctly, credited, or didn't know the composers, these kinds of things. And the way I was in my brain was just like, no, this is wrong. They need to know this. So it was very important for me to kind of correct this. And that's also how I kind of ended up on the original staff team at VGMDB at the time, because it was kind of like an effort to centralize all this video game music information.
Well, I definitely want to talk about that. But just to go back for a second, how long were you actually in Brazil for?
Let's see. Together, like 2.5 years, 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, I got quite a bit of friends out there actually. Both people I've met in person and people that I've just been corresponding with for a long time. It's pretty interesting. It's funny too what you said about sometimes you feel alone in a place like that, or a place that's not where you grew up. And I guess that could stand even where you grew up because for me as somebody that like we didn't have the money to travel, so when I
Mhm.
started going to all of these different places, um, I really didn't feel like an outsider in any of them, even though I definitely was. But there was one place in particular that was actually in the U.S. where everybody spoke English that I didn't get along really with anybody there. It was a completely different culture and mindset, even though it was it's a hour and 40-minute flight from where I lived at the time, but it just felt like Taiwan felt like a second home. I'd gone there so much, made so many friends. It's a big city like New York. Well, Taipei is where I was most of the time, but this other place should have been so familiar, and it wasn't. I made like two friends that when they were around, I'd have a drinking buddy, and then when they weren't, I would be writing stories. Just like you said, like find some way to communicate. I would be up in the hotel room writing, and eventually that kind of evolved into retro RGB. So I completely understand, or at least I think I understand what you were saying when you described that. And it's funny too, because if you'd probably been dropped in a slightly different place, a different city or a different area, you might have had a wildly different experience.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was in Sao Paulo,
Hmm.
but what was Brazilians? They're wonderful people. They're very warm and friendly, very open-minded for the most part, and also very sensual. Like it was an extremely sensual place. I'm from Norway. I barely have an expression, and emotion is like a word in the dictionary, but I'm not too sure about the definition. So when I came there, I was just like, I scared people because they couldn't elicit much of a reaction from me. And I tried my best, of course, and over time it got better, obviously.
Hmm.
And now I'm a sensual man of many languages. But at the time, I was just like, completely out of my element, and I was just like, "Hello, I'm Norwegian. Nice to meet you." It's like, get away from me, just. So yeah, it was very difficult, and I had to have some sort of voice that responded to me, and I found that it was my own, that I could kind of at least just tell myself how I felt. And even this to me was a new thing, just I hadn't even for myself thought about how do I feel about this, what can I do about this, what is my weaknesses, as I mentioned earlier. And yeah, it was a great learning experience. And I mean, I still love all my friends from Brazil. I wish I could go back, but it's hard to travel these days.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good that you kind of threw yourself into that and forced yourself kind of out of the bubble, I guess. I always had the opposite problem. I was always like the freaking Kool-Aid man smashing through the wall everywhere I went. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
exactly. People were just like, "Oh God," And I always get so offended when people from elsewhere in the world just talk about Americans as if all of us are loud, drunk assholes. But I am. So it's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
it's like I'm trying to whenever I travel to try to set an example, but I also have to still be me, and I'm just like, look, make fun of me, but we're not all like this. There's a lot of really good ones.
Man, I remember my first trip to the US. So I hadn't turned 20 yet. I was 19. I just got out of school. I literally had like stepped out of school and like, well, this is a mistake. And like, what can I do? And my dad and my mother, who were wonderful, supportive people, were like, we don't really have the money to travel, but we'll help you because we can tell that like you still need to find out what you want to do. And so I went, and they asked me, well, where do you want to go? And I think they expected like Japan or something, but I had no interest of going there. But where I wanted to go was I wanted to go to New York, and they were like, "Why do you want to go to the U.S.?" It's like, well, there's that first scene in the Ninja Turtles movie where the cop eats the pizza. I want to go to the street corner and eat the pizza. And that was the first thing I kind of did. Didn't go to New York in the end. I went to Chicago, which wonderful city.
Oh,
But I
and
did
you
go.
ate their pizza? Gross.
I found. I know.
Sorry, everybody from Chicago is about to get on Twitter right now. Like, you son of a bitch! Don't you talk about our potato pizza
I
that
actually
way.
found a normal pizza place though, because I discovered very quickly that Chicago deep dish is not a pizza. I'm very sorry to say it's a pie.
Yeah.
And come at me, bro. You can find me on Twitter.
I still think it's delicious, but it's not
good.
the same.
But I can't stand on a street corner and hold it
No.
and eat it. I mean, I can, but I'd probably be deported. But I just remember like that first bite, I started crying because I was just like, I couldn't believe, that I was actually doing, I was actually reenacting the Ninja Turtles movie like I never expected. And I never spoken English to anyone. I remember the family I stayed with was a friend of mine that I talked to on a message board. And we only, at that time, didn't voice chat much. It was mid-2000s. And his family was like so ready for this foreigner to come over, and like they picked me up at the airport and they spoke so softly and quietly. They were wonderful people. They were like, "Oh, so we are going out of the airport and like we're gonna drive slowly so you don't get scared of the highways because they might." And I was just like, yeah, okay, because I was like, yeah, I'll fuck with them for as long as I can. So the whole like week, the first week there, I just had the most broken and like backwards English I could. And then finally at the dinner table I was just like, by the way, I think I speak okay English. And they're like, whoa, like why? Like, why did you do this to us? Like, because I could.
Aw.
So, but they took it with a smile.
Good. Now, I always like to ask people this. No one I've ever asked gets offended, but some people in the comments tend to. I don't understand this at all, but I'm always fascinated about how people are able to speak multiple language from childhood. I always was wondering, where did you start with English? I know in Europe it's a lot different. English is kind of ingrained in certain parts of society depending on what job you have and all that stuff and where you grew up. But where did you actually learn English, and where did you start speaking it in like a casual manner like this?
I'm deeply offended by this question. So I learned it from watching Ninja Turtles and WWF, to be quite honest with you, because I grew up in the 80s and we didn't have English classes yet. You could take them, but it was like British English. It was like, "Can I serve you soup, sir?" And it's like, I don't need to know how to ask for soup. So I just played video games and watched specifically Ninja Turtles, but a lot of WWF and a lot of just the Saturday morning cartoons because we had the pirated satellite.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. So I got a lot of American pop culture via this. I mean, late. I used to sneak up at night and watch like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies all night long, and just B action movies and martial arts films, and then video games and Ninja Turtles during the day. That was my teacher, my sensei in English. So I learned through that because it was out of necessity because I was playing all these video games, and I wanted to understand them. So I was about 5, I think. Around five when I started reading English, and then I spoke English for the first time around the time when I went to the U.S.
And at that age, was it easy to differentiate between like, okay, this is a different language, but they're, when they're screaming and yelling the wrestlers are screaming and yelling at each other and, hurling them across the ring. Like, I'm trying to think of what I would have interpreted that at 5 years old. Would I have been, open enough to understand that not all Americans scream and throw each other across a ring? Or would I have,
I had 2 brothers, so that was just dinner time for me. Regardless.
Okay.
So the screaming and hollering was just fine. I knew exactly what that meant. But no, I mean, I still have a very good relationship to my big brother is 7 years older than me. So, I mean, by the time I was born, he was already super into comic books and he's really into like action figures and Star Wars and this stuff. So just because of that too, I had such good access to all this at a young age because he kind of curated things for me.
So it was easy to differentiate the culture when you're flipping between a cartoon, wrestling, and just a regular TV show. So
I guess so. I mean,
Because remember,
I
I'm
get
asking the 5-year-old you. You know, the teenage you, of
right.
course,
Yeah,
would know that. The 10-year-old you, obviously, but just the 5-year-old
that's
you. You
five.
know.
Well, I mean, my favorites were like Jake the Snake and Bret Hart. So like they spoke softly. I kind of
True.
gravitated, which I do too. I mean, uh, yeah, I'll give you some behind the scenes secret here. My volume on my microphone is like at the top so that you can hear me. So I've always been super soft spoken, and so I gravitated more towards the storytellers than I did. I mean, I love the whole Hulkster and all that stuff, but my favorites were kind of like the people who were a little bit beyond that. They could talk calmly because they knew what they were doing.
So, in your travels, so you went from Norway to the U.S. and Chicago for the first time, played a really fucking mean practical joke in the family you were staying with.
Well, they were fine with it. Like
And then
they thought it was funny.
that was sounds like a vacation though, right? So then you just went back to Norway for a while and then moved to
No,
Brazil,
it
or
wasn't no. So it was kind of set up where, because I mean, my friend, it was kind of like an exchange, though one-sided. So I guess there was no exchange. I guess they just imported me, but they were kind of okay. You can stay for a while. You can kind of figure out, because at 20, I was already an old man in my mind. I was just kind of like, oh, I need to figure out what I need to do, and like I'm a flawed human being. I need to find myself. It's like, all right, Obi-Wan, like just come over to the States. And yeah, when I was there, I got really involved with again just video game stuff, but I got really involved like Magfest because they invited me as a guest because my name had started spreading just because of my knowledge of Japanese video game music. So because I was one of the few sources at that time that kind of directly had some connection to like Sega and things like this.
Mhm.
So yeah, Magfest invited me as a guest during that time, and I started helping them as much as I could. And I went there every year since. I haven't been many years now, but at that time I used to go every winter because they enjoyed my company, I guess.
That's cool. I don't think I've ever been to Magfest, but I've been to plenty of others. So it's they're always fun.
Yeah, I mean, Magfest was fun because it was more of a video game music convention. It was one of the few, and I was really into a band called the Mini Bosses at the time,
I think
which
I
was like
remember
one of
them.
the yeah, they were like one of the first like metal arrangement bands for NES music.
Hmm.
And I had kind of come into them via Japan actually, because in Japan there's the doujin scene, which is similar. It's like arrangement of video game music, but it's organized much more with like its own conventions and whatnot. And then I discovered the mini bosses, and when I started going to Magfest, I always felt like, well, this is the closest we can get to like a komiket, or this kind of Japanese equivalent where you can present video game music in this fashion. So yeah, I went that first Magfest just so I could kind of see the mini bosses in action, and they became a good friend of mine. So it was a great trip, and I have many wonderful memories from that.
Very cool. So I'm trying to picture the map of Audi here. So you get to
Don't.
Chicago, you get to Brazil, and then did you actually go to Japan at one point as well?
Let's see. I forgot when my first like Japanese travel started. It's been kind of sporadic.
But you didn't live
'Cause
there. You were just traveling there.
not at the time. I later on I would go to live and work there. But at the time, no. In the mid 2000s, no. And then late 2000s, I was working primarily in Europe with like video game music symphonies and whatnot, like because at that time I kind of got into production rather than because the journalistic stuff. It was fun, but I don't enjoy so much what I found, especially about the US sites. And I mean, I'm not slighting them for saying it, but there was a lot of competition, and I've never been one to compete. I've always been kind of like, we're a team and we create things together and we all benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the US centric sites are very much like, this is my space, that's this is what I do, and you do not step into this territory. And I found this very kind of hard because I just don't have it in me to kind of go in with that aggressive mentality where it's like, no, This is my spot. Do not touch it. I'm always going to be kind of like, yeah, let's, like, kumbaya, everyone. So, yeah, so that's why I kind of like started going into actual video game production, because I had an opportunity in the late 2000s or 2010, and then started going into that instead.
It's funny you say that. Like, one of some of the biggest pushbacks I've gotten has been from journalists, and I'm wondering if that's why. I wonder if just my attitude of I'm going to do whatever I want and you're not going to stop me really pisses people off sometimes when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's an unfortunate kind of thing, because I totally get the mentality. I mean, you're building stories and it becomes your child. I mean, when I was doing huge exposés on like new games and whatnot at the time, you care about the story. You want to make sure everything is right, properly sourced and told, and it's your sources, it's your, it's yours. I totally got it, but what I didn't get was just kind of like how I could let other people come in and join me in this, and then if I have some things that need to be taken care of, I can help, and we can work together. And this wasn't the mentality of most of the other writers at the time. Some, of course, but for the others, no. And so I totally get it, and I'm not slighting anyone. If you work with me journalistically and feel like, oh, he's talking about me now, no, absolutely not. I totally understood. But for me, this is not the way I wanted to write, and I'm very headstrong also, so I didn't enjoy just sitting there and like, okay, well, just kind of crawl back into my corner. I was very vocal that I don't understand this. This is not a good way to work.
Interesting. So at what point did you start working on the video game music website? Because that's a site, I never get the acronym right, so you have to spell it out for me, but it's a site.
VGMDB.net.
VGMDB.net. There's so many damn letters in that one.
Yes. Yeah, that's so I'm not going to take credit for anything there. I mean, that's Secret Squirrel and Chris Heng and those guys, started it, but I was part of the original staff members that came in to, create what's there. With like Thompson and Ramsa, Teo and Ramsa, and all these great guys. But yeah, this came about just because, as I mentioned, I was known as a source for like Japanese video game stuff. I was dependable because I could actually reach out to a lot of these composers directly and get proper credits, or figure things out, or even bring them on. I even did their podcasts. I was the host of the podcast for a while on that site. No longer active, obviously, but yeah, it was just kind of like, well, Audi's one of those guys that knows a lot about the scene and Japanese video game music scene and knows those composers, so they just asked me like to come on staff, and I did. So it wasn't paid or anything, but it was great. I mean, I love that site, and it's probably my favorite internet accomplishment. Not in terms of me, but I think the internet accomplished something by having that site, because that has a full register of artists, of albums, of projects, all this stuff, and it's all in one place. It's all properly tagged. All this stuff that I was so gung-ho about earlier. So it was a dream come true for me that site actually came to exist. And yeah, Secret Squirrel did an amazing job with that.
And that site has music from every platform, arcade, every console, right? I mean, that's you really covered all ground with that one.
Yeah, I mean, it has even grown, because when it started, it was video game music database. And so we kind of focused mostly on getting fan works and official works. That was kind of the designation between them. And nowadays they've added anime and tokusatsu and all kinds of visual art entertainment in there. So I mean, the database has exploded in size, but it's just such a good database that it doesn't matter. You still find the information easily. And this was again, it was just something. It was exactly what even when I was doing journalistic work or just my own articles on like HD 101, it was always about getting information out to people and making it publicly available easily. So yeah, I was very honored that I could be part of that original setup.
Yeah, I just jumped on the site real quick to bring it up to make sure I was thinking of the right one, and I absolutely was. I still use this site all the time. Very cool
Yeah,
place.
yeah. I mean, it still looks the same too. It still has that
Yeah.
purple coloring. But yeah, I think that's site's gonna last forever, and then, yeah, it's really cool. Really proud of what they achieved with it.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So, this whole time, I mean, your day jobs were still uh, in working with video game music people, I guess.
Yeah, that's so because I worked for like local newspapers and stuff until like 2007,
Mm-hmm.
and then at that point, I was getting enough offers to like come as assistant or consultant or whatever it would be for different projects, usually involving video music. So like the symphonies in Germany by the amazing Thomas Böcker. Like I didn't do much there, but I helped out as much as I could, and just the different video game composers that wanted to reach out to the Western fans. I helped them as much as I could, and I mentioned earlier Chris Holzbeck, who was a legendary C64 and Amiga composer. We met up eventually, and we to this day are like super close friends. So I started working with him and his management basically at the time, which was an interesting experience. And yeah, so I just from like 2007 and on, I was still writing these articles for like Hardcore Gaming 101, and those were pretty popular. But my day job, yes, stepped into the world of actual producing and things like this.
Cool. So, where did you move on to from there then? I mean, it's I guess the past 10 years. You're still obviously very deeply ingrained in the scene here. So,
Where I moved on in terms of my day job, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah, so I started working with Chris closely and took care of his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of led me into all these different game productions and whatnot. At the same time, here in Europe, there was a couple of companies where I had the consultant and assistant producer role, which no longer exists. One of them was in Oslo and did mathematics games. And they actually dragged me in to do the voice acting for an owl in one of those games. I still cannot find that game. But if anyone out there hears this voice right now and it's like, that sounds like the owl that taught me math, please send me an email, because I would like to get that game. And yeah, from there, let's see. I'm trying. It's been a long time since I thought about all this. From there, in like the early 2010s, I started working also in localization because some companies came up via friends of mine. And so there's one company I've been working with for many, many years, and that's Sakai Project, which does a lot of localization for like Japanese adventure games in Taiwan. You mentioned Taiwan earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of Taiwanese games that we localize and publish. So yeah, that's kind of my day job stuff. Kind of ends up in localization and producing, because I started producing games as well at that time, like actually producing the games themselves.
Very cool. What have you ever played any other speaking role in any of them, or were you just the wise owl that one time?
Let's see. Yes, I have secretly been not much of a voice actor, as people on DF Retro would know. But let's see. There is a visual novel where I had to step in and do a voice. And there is a game coming out where I do the shopkeeper voice, because they asked if I wanted to do it. Because of my great fame from DF Retro, I guess they wanted me to do the shopkeeper voice.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So, voice acting is not my forte or my talent, but it is fun to be asked.
It's funny. You never know if you're good at that stuff unless you just try it.
Oh, I know if I'm good or not. I'm not.
Yeah.
So, no. So yeah, but it's an interesting thing to do, because I really, especially in my daily life, I really do not express myself much. I'm a very quiet person. So when people ask me to do stuff like that, it's like, you want me to say what now and what way? It's like, all right, how? It's like, as a southerner, like I can't do a southern accent. So it's always kind of interesting, these requests. I try my best though. I can't say no, but
That's pretty funny.
or do it in Japanese, which is even harder.
Yeah, how many languages do you speak?
Fluently, I don't know what. Obviously, I speak the Scandinavian languages. I have a pretty good. I've heard I have a pretty good Danish and Swedish accent. Because normally here, people try to speak with their own language, and it kind of works. But because I traveled so much between these companies, eventually, especially Sweden, because of the game industry there, I was just like, no, I'm just gonna get the accent down, and then I think I speak okay English.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I got pretty good at Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, when I was there. At least in my mind, I got good. I could at least order soup in also Portuguese as well as British English. And Japanese, I'm okay at. I wish I was better. Every time I do speak Japanese, it's like, God damn it! Like, why didn't I pay attention in school? And fairly okay in German. I guess that's, and my partner is French, so she tries to teach me French, but I emphasize on tries. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's it.
That's quite a long list. The Scandinavian languages always fascinate me too. I was out in Sweden for work, and one person that met us there was from Norway, and the two people had never met before. The three of us had never met before, and we're hanging out, and they're speaking. I mean, I guess he was trying to speak in Swedish, and he points to I don't know what was in his hand. Maybe it was a hammer. I honestly don't remember, but there was a tool in the other guy's hand, and he's like, "What do you guys call that?" And he said the name. He's like, "Oh, that's funny. We call it this." And then they needed to break into English just for that one sentence, just to be like, "Oh yeah, what's that?" But the whole rest of the conversation, they were able to communicate, no problem at all. So.
Yeah, that's the thing about these languages, is that we have like these words that will just throw off the entire language and like ruin your day. It's like, what did he say to me? Like, I'm pretty sure it meant something about my mother, but it's like, no, it's just the name of a wrench in Swedish. So, but it is interesting because you get only so far, especially when you're working there. Like for me, what I noticed when I worked with like game developers stuff is that they just switched over to English, because it's like trying to get all the, like, we had to re-explain ourselves, because like, well, I kind of got what you meant, but there's a couple of words in there I didn't like. What does that mean? It's like, you know what, like, let's just speak the international language as appointed, and like, screw this.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm lucky that I get to be lazy and just sit back on the default.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times out in Taiwan we were speaking to somebody from Hong Kong, which they speak Cantonese predominantly, and then in Taiwan it's predominantly Mandarin. So everybody ended up speaking in English, and everybody was really bad at each other's language. So it was kind of amusing and frustrating to just sit there and just be patient and get through. But luckily with nerd stuff, like, but power and ground in every single language, whatever you call it, it's still going to be power. So it's, with the nerd stuff, it wasn't too bad,
Yeah, retro gaming also has become very easy across languages. So yeah, it's becoming more universal.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I always thought was so cool about it, that I didn't realize until after I had started RetroRGB, and that just like music, you could have nothing else in common with somebody. You could not speak their language, but you absolutely could bond over loving the same game, loving the same songs, playing the same instrument, your fighting style in Street Fighter. It's one of those very interesting things that reminds everybody how human beings really communicate. It's not just language. There's a lot more to it.
Oh yeah, Street Fighter 2 might just be like the greatest communication tool we've invented in the last century, because it's like, I can't tell you how many times when I lived in Brazil, I didn't speak anything, or even in Japan in the beginning, it's like, you can't understand. You can point, you can kind of like say one word or two words that they understand, but playing Street Fighter, everyone had a good time, and you kind of got the sense of their personality a little bit from their tactics. Because I play a lot of fighting games, so it's like, oh, okay, sneaky bastard is like this, huh? And so you can make friends without even saying a single word for Street Fighter. So
Absolutely.
I love Street Fighter 2.
The other thing too, you don't need to be good at video games to enjoy them. I mean, like if you just
No.
you could, you know, even if you're a beginner, you could certainly find ways to get started. And even if you're never like me, I'm never going to be at the level of many of my friends. It's never going to happen. I could practice every day, all day. You know, I'm never going to dunk like Michael Jordan. I'm never going to be able to play Street Fighter like my friends. But we could absolutely have a match and still enjoy ourselves. Doesn't matter if I win or lose. It's still going to be fun. And in fact, a lot of my friends try their like you when I mean this in a nice way, by the way, but they kind of use playing against me as practice time. Like, okay, I'm gonna beat Bob with no blocks, or you know, without ever using this, and it's fun for both of us because I have a fighting chance now, and they get to practice strategies, and you know, everybody has a good time. You know, everybody knows I'm not there to try and become the next fighting game champ. I'm just there to have some fun and laugh with my friends. So.
Yeah, I'm not competitive at all either, so I have a lot of fun just playing, you know, Street Fighter 2 casually. With even now, I have two nieces. I mean, the eldest one is 4 years old, and she finally now kind of gets the concept of video game controllers. And of course, is like, all right, well, you're at that level. We're going straight to Street Fighter 2. And but she had a lot of fun, and kids always like Blanca, so they always pick Blanca.
Me too. I am a big kid though, so that's probably why.
So yeah, so she play Blanca, and it's just fun to see them figure it out. And like again, it's a tool. Street Fighter 2 is a magical thing. We could do probably an episode on just Street Fighter 2, but I guess that's not the topic of today.
Yeah, I don't know. I always loved Street Fighter, but for whatever crazy reason, Mortal Kombat was always my favorite. And it's the only I don't want to say I'm good at it, but it's the only one where I absolutely wouldn't embarrass myself if I went and played with a bunch of pros. So I always loved that game. I don't know why. It's just my thing. I think.
Oh, I love Mortal Kombat. I mean, I love fighting games in general. It's the one genre I play the most likely. And yeah, Mortal Kombat was such a phenomenon when it released. Even here for me, it was just because. It was different. It did its own thing, and it made such an impact. That first uppercut, the impact of that punch was like forceful and like almost painful to watch. And so it was like a transcendent video game moment when I saw Mortal Kombat for the first time.
Yeah. The first time I saw Sub-Zero's finishing move, I laughed so hard. Because, like, it's weird. Like, I don't like realistic violence. There's awesome movies like House of a Thousand Corpses, which is scary, and it's a really great movie. But there's a scene where you don't actually see anything, but it's kind of horrible. Like, you know what's going on. Like, I don't enjoy that. But, like, I just watching The Boys, and, you know, spoiler alert, at one, you know, it's a pretty gory thing, and when their heads exploded, I was just giggling. Because it's not realistic, you know? It's just fun and silly, so...
Yeah, you toe a line. I mean, if you know, Mortal Kombat is so mystical, and I think it's a color. You know, it has bright blue and yellow, and you know, so it kind of takes you out of that realism and puts you in a fantasy setting, which I think those new Mortal Kombats kind of lack a little bit because they go a little bit too far for me, because I hate violence too. But I love action. I always, you know, I've done martial arts since I was a kid, and as I mentioned, I was watching like martial arts movies and all. I still do. It's my second love alongside video games. So I'm very into choreography and action and these things. But if you show me violence, if you show me like gore, I am completely repulsed by it, and I'm not into that, both in movies and video games.
Well, you know, it's funny though that you like fighting games because it's kind of perfect. Then it is that fantasy of you get to have your kung fu movies that you control without actually hurting anybody. So,
oh, absolutely. I mean, that's goes hand in hand. And lately, one thing I've been doing lately is audio commentaries for Blu-rays for martial arts movies like Jackie Chan and Van Damme movies.
Oh, really?
Because somehow this happened, like anything else in my life. But
so it's actually like a legit licensed reprint of the movie with one of your audio tracks on there?
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
So I've been doing 15, done 15 so far, ranging from Van Damme, Jackie Chan, and some other upcoming ones now. It's very, I mean, audio commentaries are very interesting to do. It requires a lot of research, and it also requires kind of concise train of thought, which is not my specialty. But it's interesting because when I do that research, because I'm such a video game guy, I always kind of look into what's the video game angle of this movie. Like, did it impact video games at all? Did video games impact the movie? And I find that, like, in most cases, yes. You know, I was doing a Jackie Chan movie recently from 1981, and I was just browsing through interviews and old documentation on Street Fighter, and just so happened to see that they mentioned that specific old Jackie Chan film as an inspiration for Street Fighter. And I was like, oh, like, I don't think this has been talked about much before. And so I talked about that on the commentary. So it's interesting to see these worlds come together for me, because not too many people do all this stuff. So it's fun to merge my loves together finally on actual Blu-rays.
That's really awesome. That's so cool. You get the opportunity to do that. I remember I
Yeah.
loved all those martial arts movies, but for some reason, when I was a kid, the Steven Seagal movies always cracked me up. And in hindsight,
no.
I'd probably
Oh no!
they probably wouldn't be my favorites now, but I loved them then.
Actually, the fans that have been listening to my commentaries for Van Damme movies have pointed out that I have a certain dislike for Seagal, because at the time Seagal and Van Damme were like rivals, both box office and real life. They had a real life feud, and Seagal never lived up. For me, he never lived up to anything that was said about him. He was very technical. I mean, his Aikido was very poignant and technical, but it doesn't translate well on screen, I felt. And he runs like a sissy, so I could just never get into him. And and he was a terrible actor. He can't act. He's just Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
Today Steven Seagal is on a boat. Today he's on a train. Today he's saving the rainforest. It's just Steven Seagal doing Steven Seagal. So on the commentaries, I always mention that, like, Van Damme has kind of like an emotional weight to him. He can kind of, he can tell you a lot by just his eyes, his expression, and that's acting. And so some Steven Seagal fans have actually reached out to me, being like, "You don't be hard on Steven. He wasn't an actor, he was a CIA agent." It's like, of course he was.
Gross.
So I suspect it's actually Steven himself sending me these messages.
I wouldn't put it past crazy people these days.
Probably not.
Who knows? That's funny. I remember watching all of those movies. I remember enjoying them. I didn't enjoy Street Fighter as much as
Oh, that's one of the ones I did a commentary for.
Oh, I have to watch that now. I have to watch it with your commentary.
I'll send you a copy of it. Yeah, so that one, Sony Pictures reached out to me and John, because they wanted something new for the Blu-ray. And when I say John, I mean John Lindman, obviously. And they were just kind of like, we want a new audio commentary for this film that kind of brings together the film and the video game. And we don't want someone that will just instinctively say it's a bad film, because I don't think it's a bad film.
I don't think it's a bad film either, but it's got its moments.
It certainly has its moments. And I think when you know about the production, it all makes sense. And I think that the performances by Raul Julia is like a classic supervillain and all these things. So actually, I did the official commentary track for the new print of Street Fighter on Blu-ray. And that was a huge... that was one of those moments where I just pinched myself and asked what's happening to my life. Because maybe we'll get into it, but I mean, I spent many years in kind of exile. I was just depressed, and I didn't do anything with myself because I just lost faith in my abilities, like about 7 years ago. So these last 2 years have just been insane. When first of all, people remember me is one thing, but the other thing is getting to do like the audio commentary for the official re-release of Street Fighter the movie, which I grew up with and like idolized. It still makes me quite emotional thinking about that.
Yeah, that's nuts. That is absolutely awesome.
So yeah.
You know what's funny about that movie? The star that lasted the longest for that one, Ming-Na Wen. She had her resurgence. She was awesome in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She was probably the best character in that. And then she's in The Mandalorian now. No spoilers. That's not a spoiler. She's in it.
She was in season 1. No.
So.
Yeah, and she's great. Ming-Na Wen is she looks the same. That's the most important. Like, she still looks the same as she did in Street Fighter.
She can still do all
has
those
not
crazy
aged.
moves too. That's
Yeah. She's. And I mean, she's also someone that I actually spoke to her shortly just via email. Like, this is actually not in regards to the Street Fighter movie. It was something else a few years ago when she did. This is when I was doing Destructoid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was an E3 or something. But she was doing voice work, and I just got to like shortly say hello. And she's incredibly beautiful in real life. But I mean, she was also Aki Ross in the Final Fantasy film, and like she's just had a lot to do with video games. So yeah, she's a cool girl, and yeah, she's probably come the best out of Street Fighter. She probably had the most sustained career, I'd say.
She was also in that movie with the same title as the terrible game, Hong Kong 97.
Oh, Hong Kong 97.
Yeah.
Yes, with Robert Patrick.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. It's
not either of their best
earliest.
movies.
No, you can see Robert Patrick's ball sack, but I guess you can see his ball sack in Terminator 2 as well if you look closely. So that's kind of his thing, I guess, in the 90s.
You know what's funny about him is I've always been a massive fan of the X-Files. I remember sitting on my grandparents' floor seeing the previews for it before, that summer, before it even debuted, and I'd never missed an episode. And by the time seasons 8 and 9 came out, like, no, it should have just ended. Like, it shouldn't have continued.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody wanted to see a Mulder replacement, and I remember just watching him with such disdain. Just like in the first episode he was in, he did the Terminator run, which was kind of funny, and then that was it. Like, and a few years ago, I rewatched every single episode over the course of like a year, and he absolutely carried those seasons. He was
he's
awesome
great.
in
No, he was awesome in the X-Files, because I used to watch X-Files religiously as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also the spin-off, if you remember that, with
of course, the Lone Gunman.
Yeah, the Lone Gunman, which yeah,
that was pretty good
but
too. It wasn't bad.
It was alright. It wasn't bad. I was more into Millennium at the time. I loved Millennium with Lance Henriksen, which was kind of also a slight spin-off.
Yeah, I never
even had a crossover.
I never gave that one a chance. I probably should.
Oh, you should. Especially the first season is amazing. And I mean, I love Lance Henriksen and almost everything he does. So, yeah, you should definitely check out Millennium. That was my go-to show at that time. But yeah, X-Files I used to watch, and I had the same reaction as you. It was like, well, now's a new cast, and it's not going to be the same. Mm-hmm. But then I came around earlier than you, though, because I was like watching, and I was like, he has his own thing going. He is his own, he's a little bit more grounded than Mulder is. I kind of like his approach. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
It's funny. I did this with Knight Rider as well, but when I watched them all, I took like little notes on each episode, and I figure someday if I ever have a free moment of time ever again, I would love to go and do like a Pushing Up Roses style video on some of these either episodes.
Oh yeah. She's great. She also did the Murder She Wrote. I saw. I haven't seen too much of videos. Yeah, but I love the way she presents these videos. So. I'm very, very late to the YouTube game personally, because I didn't watch any YouTubers throughout these last few years. Mm-hmm. So I'm discovering now, thanks to like DF Retro and all this, like all these wonderful people that are actually in the community and surrounds the community. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I did see her, because I think she worked with Clint a little bit as well. Lazy Game Reviews. So. Yeah, good stuff. And she did X-Files stuff as well.
Yeah, one or two. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that she does, I actually recommend. Like, if some of the games that she talks about, if you're just in it for a blast of nostalgia, you'll get more enjoyment out of watching a 20-minute video of hers than you will going back and playing, whatever game it was for 3 hours and having to bang your head against the wall trying to get through all the crap we got through when we were kids, because you bought the game and now you have no other choice. This is all you got to do with it. So Yeah, those are pretty cool. It's funny though. I was late to the game in YouTube as well, and I'm still kind of not in the loop because by the time I started doing videos, I was so busy with everything else that I never really had time to jump into that. And every time I talk to people who do YouTube videos, they're always dropping all of these names of all these great channels that I'm supposed to know about, and I just don't know who most of these people are. And it's my fault, obviously. I'm not trying to take away from what they're doing. I'm just like I'm completely out of the loop, and I try to find different ways to catch up and watch some of these very cool content and channels, but it's hard. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a YouTuber. I don't have my own channel or anything. But it's because like in the early 2010s, well, my impression, and at the time I was working at like the websites, and when, for example, if I review the game and then I watched like a review on YouTube at that time, it was very like angry game nerd centric stuff. And no offense to him, he has his legacy and he's done great stuff. But that wasn't my type of video. I didn't enjoy watching someone, pursue curse all over and talk about poop so much. This is the style and it was fine. But for me, working in reviews at the time, I was frustrated with it because when I was reviewing a game, I was trying to be, bring out what is good about the game, what is bad, and for the most part there was very little kind of response to this approach. But then when I looked at YouTube at the time, it was like people were like, that guy's funny because he said that like the difficulty of this game is like pooping on a buffalo or something like this. And it's like, well, I mean, yes, we all been there and done that, but is it really that interesting? Like,
well, it's two.
Don't you want to know why Gianna
things,
Sisters is a good game?
It's two completely different
it's two different things.
It's really easy to get frustrated, but it's not like you shouldn't be comparing one to the other. One is entertainment, and even James himself said a bunch of times that he actually didn't mind a lot of the games he reviewed. He just thought it was funny and called out the bad parts to him. Whereas a legitimate review that people are going to read based on whether they want to buy a game or not, that's a completely different thing. And it's kind of all entertainment's like that, right? I mean, if you get a news channel that just says, like, here's what's going on today, versus you have the channel that's like, and stay tuned after the break to find out why everyone in your house might die. Like, that one's,
yeah.
That's going to get all the views because it's all the clickbait nonsense crap, but it's two different things, so.
Oh, it's totally two different things. And I mean, it's totally on me for not earlier understanding a little bit of the dynamic here. But I mean, just working and just kind of, and as I said, it was not my style of video, and I would just felt like anywhere I was looking, this was YouTube. It really made YouTube for me seem like, so I watched YouTube, and then when John kind of invited me back into the industry this way, and I started getting recommendations from him to like watch My Life in Gaming, for example. I remember he told me that like there's this channel called My Life in Gaming. They're good friends of mine. You should check them out because we should do something together, all of us. And I was like, all right, never heard of them. Kind of weird name. And then I binged watched it from like 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. that night. I just like, I couldn't get enough of it because I was like, this exists? Like, this is so well researched, and like Corey's so handsome. Like, I can't, like, this is actually real. And I'm kind of sad now because there's so much content I missed out on with this mentality and this kind of poisoning of my own thinking what YouTube could be, that now I'm trying catching up and discovering all these great guys, because it really is the retro community is really an awesome and wonderful place, which I never thought I was gonna be welcomed into this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to walk into any community and just see what stands out the most. The loudest voices are always the one most heard, but they almost never, represent the majority of people. So it's very easy to walk into a new community and just go, oh, this isn't for me. Like, just because you happen to stumble across the one forum where, the trolls rule, and not, it's not like that everywhere else. So it is a cool place, and I've met so many amazing people.
Yeah, truly. I mean, the last few years meeting, these people, just because one thing is just the content they create, which is awesome, But then, meeting them at E3 and things like this, or talking to you like this, it's like the people that you are so friendly and warm and welcoming. And for many years, I didn't even welcome myself much. I was just kind of like, I'm kind of out of this stuff. And then to come back and just see how great everyone is, and as you mentioned earlier, it's like we all speak the same language of these video games. So
Yeah.
even if I don't know them too well, it takes me like 2 minutes, and we already there's something in there. There's some game we played together, like at the same time or something, where it's like, okay, we totally get each other, and it's really fun to make new friends this way.
You mentioned a couple times, and if this is a personal question, I'll cut this part out. I don't mean to offend anybody on this
No,
one,
no,
but
go ahead.
you mentioned getting depressed for a period of time. Did you have something that snapped you out of it? Because a lot of my friends suffer from bouts of depression here and there. It's only, I mean, everybody gets bummed out now and then. That's totally different. But I've only had one actual like stretch that lasted like a month, and then I had something fun happen, and then I got busy and didn't have time to be depressed. That was it. I was back to being just like a fat drunk Santa Claus, like I usually am. But it's I was just always curious if somebody had their I don't know, probably the opposite of trigger, whatever that is, to snap them out of something like that.
Well, you say you're a Santa Claus, but I'm the one wearing this Christmas shirt.
Fair enough.
No. So yeah, I'm not. I've never been a depressed person myself. What kind of happened was I burnt out, and I said earlier I was very critical of myself, more so than anyone else could ever be. I'm my biggest critic. And in the like 2012-13 period, I was just, well, for one, I had almost passed due to a kidney issue.
Oh, geez.
So my health was very bad, and that actually happened at Magfest. That was, I think, the last year I was at Magfest. I was the caretaker of Koshiro Yuzo because he was a friend of mine, and he was like, "Hey, you should come to Magfest and take care of me because I don't know what I'm doing." So I went there with him, and during that time, I had a kidney, my kidney shut down, and I had to take him to the train station, back to the airport, and then after that, I was just like, well, I'm dying. So my friend rushed me to the hospital, and I almost passed. Wow. So I had that moment, which was not fun, you could say, because that. First of all, the hospitals in the U.S., I luckily had insurance, but just that feeling was not fun, and it was very difficult. And the recovery for that was I never really talked about publicly, but I mean, my recovery for that was extremely painful and took a long time. I was very sick and thin for a long time, and I tried my best to kind of get back on my feet, and I tried too hard. I crowdfunded a book, and I really wasn't ready for that scope of a project. I did finish it, but it took too long, and it was fully my responsibility and my fault for it taking so long. But that just like constantly criticizing myself for, I'm taking too long, I can't finish this, I can't do this, I'm falling behind, I'm not growing. This is my biggest problem with anything. Was just like, I felt like I just kind of, well, I am a producer, yes, and I'm localizing these Japanese video games, yes, that was my day job. But I was just kind of like, I kind of felt like my spot in the industry had been set, and I had peaked, because I had done these like popular articles on like hardcore gaming, and people remember me for that. And I just felt like if I was remembered, I was remembered for something I had done, and I was not getting anything done in the future. That was kind of like, oh, he's still at it, he's still good. So I was just getting frustrated, and then fell into a deep depression due to this. I just burnt out, quite simply.
Yeah, somebody asked me to describe burnout, because I a couple times I just hit a wall where I was just like, I couldn't, I just couldn't continue for a couple days. I had to take a day or two off and just do nothing almost. And bear with me here, because this is like, I promise this is gonna 30 seconds from now you're gonna understand what I'm talking about. But
No, go
like,
ahead.
imagine you had to get a job where the job was taking cinder blocks, off of a truck and stacking them up against something. How long do you think most people would last before their arms just wouldn't be able to lift anymore? It'd be like going to the gym and doing nonstop reps all day. I'd probably make it through the day just because I'm stubborn, and then not even be able to, like, open a refrigerator the next day. So that's a day you burn out. Well, how long would it take if they were bricks? And how long it would take if they were little rocks? And then how long would it take if they were glasses? And it's kind of the same thing when you're working on stuff mentally, right? Even if there's physical stuff involved, there's gonna get a point where if you don't rest between how many you've picked up, metaphorically, obviously, like you're not going to be able to pick anything up anymore. And the lighter the thing is, the longer it takes without a break. But if you work every day for a year, 2 years, you're gonna hit a wall. There's no human on the planet that can't, unless you have proper breaks in between, and a way to clear your head, a way for your muscles to regenerate after doing all that. So I wish I took better care of myself, but I definitely hit the wall at least once a year. And do you think that's a good analogy for what happened to you as far as burning out in some of these projects?
Yeah, I think that's a good enough analogy. That would make sense. Because I was just someone that didn't. Taking good care of yourself is a good way to put it. Because I just it doesn't matter how I feel. It doesn't matter how I am. I already had health issues, but I was just like, no. I mean, I took on this project, or I crowdfunded this, or whatever I did, and because I had so many things at once. Because I was really trying my best to just kind of have some, I'm a workaholic, so one thing is that I can't stop, but the other thing is also just I just want to keep going and do things that matter and get people information, leave something behind that doesn't matter if I wrote it or not, but in 100 years, if someone finds the book I wrote or whatever it is, then that has all the information you would ever need about that. And that was the detriment in that sense, because I had kind of built up this reputation for doing these huge, expansive things. And then I did a book that was going to do every single game within a genre. And that would turn out to be 750 games. And I had to pay out of pocket to go to Japan 6 times. And to find all these different pachinko machines, because that was related. It just constantly, you're talking about these bricks. It's for every step I took in the right direction, it was well, now it has expanded and I need to do this now and this now. I added up. And I just, as angry as anyone else could be that I missed a deadline, it was I was so angry at myself for just, not getting this done because I'm supposed to, and I'm good enough, right? I'm supposed to be good enough to do this, and why am I not good enough? Why am I not finishing this the way I thought I was going to do it? So I just I was too harsh on myself, to be quite honest, and went through a valuable lesson. It's just kind of listen to your body for first one, and then talk to your friends. This was what saved me in the end, was because I was completely out of the industry, outside my day job, which I didn't think much of, but I had wonderful friends at work, of course, that supported me. But what kind of helped me eventually was that my wonderful partner Vivi was always supportive, and she was just kind of constantly pushing me to just, even if you share one thing you feel, just share that with your close friends. Just tell them how you feel, because I can guarantee you that one of them knows how you feel, and then you'll start talking, you'll start opening up, and it will feel easier. And that was the solution. So I mean, she saved my life, as she always does.
That's really cool. That's neat. That's a nice way to approach that. I don't know. It's hearing you speak and hearing all the pressure that you put on yourself. I definitely put too much pressure on myself, but I do it in such a pompous, arrogant way that I never think I'm not good enough for this. I always think I'm not good enough for that yet. I'll get to it eventually if it's important. Let me do what I can now. Let me work to that later. Let me man, I'm such an asshole sometimes. Oh.
I kind of have to be, but yeah, I didn't revert. I already assumed I wasn't good enough, and then I have to constantly prove to me, I internally tell myself, oh, you're not good enough for this. And it's oh yeah. And I mean, I've been this way my whole life, where it's if especially 10 years ago, if someone told me I couldn't do something or that wasn't possible, I would make it possible. And that was a mentality that got me up to the highest offices at Sony of Japan, and changed guidelines even. Because I was working on a game, and it's you can't do it this way. It's oh yeah, and it eventually reached the top of Sony, and I actually managed to change like a small guideline, but still, it just tells you kind of how crazy I was about this stuff. I was very stubborn.
That's awesome,
But
though.
eventually, I just didn't have the energy. I mean, I didn't have the body or the health at that time to be that stubborn, and I refused to listen. And that was the kind of downfall. But luckily, it still worked out in the end.
Well, I'm very glad it did. Now, you name dropped. I'm terrible at pronunciation. Yuji Koshiro.
Oh, Koshiro Yuzo. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, Yuzo Koshiro, the composer of Streets of Rage 2 and 1 and 3 and these kinds of games. Yes. What about him?
So you got to know him pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, for most part, I know a lot of the video game music scene in Japan over the years. Today, I don't really know how, and I'm very lucky, I guess. But yeah, in the 2000s, again, it was just kind of like reaching out, talking to them, and treating them, with respect, and then becoming friends. So Koshiro, I know very well, and I took care of his trip to the U.S. at that time. And I still visit him when I go to Japan. So I'm good friends with his mother too.
Aw.
She's a very lovely woman.
That's very cool. So, do you have any try to word this the right way? Like, in all of the people that you've met, are there any stories that stand out for, speaking to these developers? Is there anything that they told you that something that you would want to share? I guess there's. Sometimes you meet a composer or a musician and they have a story behind the song type of thing. Like, is there anything that really stands out that always sat with you that any of these amazing people were able to describe?
Oh man, the one that made the most impact on me is one I can't describe, and that's there was a composer named Umamoto Ryu, who was probably my closest friend in life, and he passed in 2011, unfortunately.
Sorry.
And yeah, that still to this day I never spoken publicly about him much, just because it's very hard for me still to kind of come to terms with the fact that he passed. But he was someone that in Japan, the circle of like Koshiro Yuzo and Yonao Keishi and all these like master composers from the Japanese home computer scene, he was kind of regarded as the god of that. And when it was in 97, I think, that I got aware of him. I got a game that he had worked on called Eve Burst Error, and I noticed his name in the credits because the first time I heard that music, it was like a wall hit me. It was the very first time I can remember that music had a spiritual impact on me. And so I tried to figure out back then, you couldn't find much Japanese information on. There was no Google, and but there's a legend at my elementary school because somehow someone installed a Windows 95 with Japanese local on it, the library computer on it. No one knows how, but I do. And I did that just because I wanted to figure out how to like spell his name, and it took forever. It took a month for me to figure out what kanji was actually his name. I could only type in the game I knew, and from there, I was an early student of Google Fu. I was just kind of like figuring out whatever I could, and then finally I nailed down, okay, this repeats, and then I found a picture of him with like the kanji underneath, so I could finally draw it on a piece of paper. And since then, I just was obsessed with his music, and never talked to him or anything like that at that time. It was 97, 98, so the concept of talking then was I was a little bit too young, I guess, and the internet was too young, wasn't ready yet. But over the next 10 years, as I said, I built up a reputation for Japanese video game music and all this. And there was a I don't know if you are familiar with like chiptune music much, but there was a festival called Blip Festival, and I was invited as a guest to that eventually. And on that show, there was a Japanese artist called Hari, or Halley in the US. And Halley is basically, I guess, my contemporary in Japan. He's like a video game music historian, but he knows way more than me. So I don't think I managed to reach up to his legendary status. But he's a good friend of mine, and this was our first meeting. And I just remember that like people were super hyped about this, that we were gonna meet as if we were gonna chat out like video music by meeting or something. It was really just two boring men sitting down. I was like, you know about that? It's like, yeah. So, but I was talking to him, and he was picking my brain, because I think it was the first time he had met a Westerner that could talk about PC98 music at any great length at the time. I think now it's been a little bit more widespread. Mm-hmm. But at the time, he was very impressed, and he was like, oh, what's your favorite video game composers? And I was like, oh, 2 and 3 is impossible for me to say, because 2 and 3 changes every day. I have so many I love, but number 1 never changes. And he's like, oh, what's number 1? And I was like, Umamoto Ryu. And I remember he stopped. He was like staring at me like, and he was like, did you just say Umamoto Ryu? And I was like, yes. And now I was getting nervous, because I was like, oh god, he probably is like a modern day Jack the Ripper, isn't he? Like he probably murdered like 15 people, and now I said it, right? It's like, you like that guy? But then he was like, Umamoto Ryu is my office partner. Like we share an office. Like I have to like tell him that he has a fan like you out there. And I was like, oh, you don't bother him with this. I have, I'm no one, and he's like a legend. So but he's like, no, I'll tell him. And so we went separate ways, and I figured he would just forget and nothing would come of this, so I just went home too. But then 2 weeks later, there was that kanji I had studied when I was a kid in my email box, and I remember I stared at that email for what felt like an hour. It probably was 10 minutes, but I just stared at it, and I could not. I couldn't connect with the world right now. Like I wasn't sure, like, what is this? Because that music had such an impact on me. So finally I clicked it, and it said almost verbatim, was something like, hello Audi, Hari-san told me about you. It's very nice to meet you. Tell me more about yourself. And that was the email. Every word was misspelled, but it was still the email. So, and I sent him a very humble email back saying, like, your music has meant more to me than anything else, and I'm very happy and humbled that you sent me an email. And please let me know if you're working on any new music. I would love to hear it. And he emailed me back. It was like, oh, thank you so much, but not. It said, thank you so much, but not important. Tell me more about yourself. And I was like, so I emailed him back. And I was like, well, really, if you have anything new, I would love to hear it, because I haven't heard anything new from you. And he's like, don't worry about my work. Tell me about yourself. I'm like, motherfucker, what do you want to know about me? Like, I haven't done anything. Like, just tell me if you've done anything new. So we actually had like a small argument of emails, I guess, that very first day. But no, we started then corresponding a lot. And I eventually then, of course, got to meet him, and I became his closest friend in life, I think. At least from what I understand from his family. But when I met him, he was a very humble man. He didn't have any ego. And when I asked him about his music, it was clear to me that it had a lot of personal meaning to him, because he had like this red notebook, which I actually have laying in some boxes over there, because his family sent me his estate after he passed. But in that notebook was just scribbles of like diagrams and numbers, and it all correlated with Zen Buddhism. He founded all of his music in Zen, and I guess that's what I learned from that, was like, because I'm not a Buddhist necessarily, but he taught me a lot about Zen. And I've taken that with me throughout my life, and especially now the last couple of years when I kind of come back on my feet. That's been instrumental also, just kind of just keeping balance. And for him, this was his key to life. But for me, I think knowing him and learning from him and watching him was my key, because he really taught me a lot about just being the person I am, because he was such a smart, humble guy. I really couldn't imagine, I didn't understand really why he was my friend because I'm not smart, and he was a genius. But he loved talking to me. We talked on Skype for hours, and he started practicing English just because he wanted to like connect with Western fans. And we started working together on projects, and I never quite understood, but he was like a brother to me. And then he passed in 2011 quite suddenly. So I got to speak with him a couple weeks before he passed, luckily on the phone. But it's still something that I deal with quite a lot internally.
Yeah, he sounds pretty incredible. I actually also
Yeah,
lost my best friend like 7 years ago now. So while I don't know
but
what you're feeling, I certainly know how it affected me. So I hear you on a lot of
it's
that.
it never goes away. Loss never goes away, and you try to fill it, and then you learn not to fill that void. You learn to remember and kind of live with that void, but appreciate also what left behind and what they gave you. So in a sense, you have to kind of embrace that. You have to kind of embrace that void in a way. It's part of you, and it continues to shape me, and it continues to teach me a lot about what I would want to do for him to say I'm proud of you, or this is cool, whatever it is. I think about him quite a lot even when I do videos with like Lindman. I often think about what kind of reaction he would have to either a good way and a humor. For some reason, he thought I was a very funny guy, so he always laughed a lot. So I always put like dry humor in our DF stuff, and it usually is because I kind of feel like he is watching it, as weird as that sounds. So yeah, that loss never goes away, and you should never forget either. The memories are very important.
Well, I think everybody that we interact with shapes who we are as people. So I don't think the memory ever could go away. I think anybody that you had a
No.
relationship with, that's going to be with you forever. So it's kind of a cheesy but cool way to remember that the people that you know will always kind of live on.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I made a promise when he passed that like I would always share. I haven't been too good at it, maybe, but like I will always share his memory, and I will share his music, and I will make sure that like people do remember him. And when he passed, I did a huge article for Gama Sutra where I did a memorial of him, and I got all of his friends like Koshiro and these guys to talk about him in that article. And a few years ago, I was invited to Japan for the memorial, like a memorial concert for him as a guest. And his family was actually there, and I had always just corresponded with them on email. I never met them, but his mother and brother was there at that time, and it was a very uh, I've never I'm how to explain this in words, but we were all so happy being there, remembering him, but we were also all crying like a lot, and it was very unusual to see this in Japan. People openly, but everyone was smiling, and then as we kind of left the venue, his family turned to me and like actually gave me a hug, which is very unusual for Japanese. And his mother said family. That was the only English word she told me, was just family. And uh,
It's a really nice story. That's really good.
it's still very hard to talk about, but yes, it was very special. So I did get I did get his estate. So I have lots of boxes of his unpublished works and stuff as well. So hopefully one day I get to do. I know Lindman has talked sometimes to me about like we should do some video music stuff, and definitely on Umemoto Ryu. So hopefully one day we get to do that soon.
Yeah, it'd be cool to put together, just like in your spare time, no rush, put together like a documentary about the works and everything.
Yeah, if people want to learn more, you can go to Gama Sutra and just search his name,
Hmm.
because the article is still up, I believe. So that shows you a lot of his childhood stuff. Because it was weird. He kind of gave me a lot of his memorabilia before he passed, which probably means something. But uh, yeah, I got a lot of this before he even passed. I had childhood pictures and stuff, and so when I did that the Kama Sutra Memorial, I actually had all this access to his childhood photos and whatnot, and even his closest friends in Japan had never seen any of this. So I remember they were just like, "Where did you get this?" And it's like, he gave it to me like half a year ago. I don't know why, but I kind of also realized now probably a reason for this.
Yeah. You know, I'll definitely post a link to that for anybody that wants
Oh,
to
thanks.
read it. You know, if I'll make sure to check in with you after this and get all links to all the cool stuff that we want to share with people. But that was a nice story.
We haven't even talked about the CDI or DF Retro yet. Wow.
Well, CDI, I have something coming up that I think I'm going to have some
Oh
fun
no.
with. But yeah, you know, I definitely wanted to go on to the DF Retro and see how you got involved with John. I met him through Corey. And
Oh,
John
okay.
was incredibly gracious to me. He was a big help in a lot of the tweaking I needed to do with my videos and stuff. And he absolutely didn't need to be at all. He could have, in every right, he would have had every right to be like, no, I'm not doing your interview, and I don't have time to deal with you and your stupid video problems. But he was the opposite. He was, and still is a giant help. So I'm forever indebted to John, and you know, certainly glad to have met him. So how did you get involved?
So this was, I think this was 2017, where, you know, as I mentioned, I was pretty much down to I had pretty much just kind of moved on and was just treating my day job as day job and went home and just kind of didn't do anything video game related. And then it just so happened that I was actually in Tokyo at the offices for my company there, and my colleague was like, "Hey, do you know this?" Because it's a Westerner doing a video, and I looked over and there was a video about Soul Reaver, like Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, and I was like, "Oh, don't recognize." And he's like, "Oh, well, you know, this is really good. Like, this is, you know, really cool video. It's really detailed." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And he's like, "Didn't you used to do this stuff? Like, didn't you used to write these articles?" And like, he just kind of like investigated, and I was like, "Ah, a long time ago." Like, but he's probably gonna start talking about poop soon enough. Like, just give it 5 minutes. So, but he didn't. Not until I joined the team. But then, like, yeah. So, but I was kind of intrigued because, you know, as I mentioned, my impression of YouTube was very different. But here was like a documentary on this game. I wasn't even I'm not a big Soul Reaver or Legacy of Kain fan necessarily. I know about them. I play them. But the video made me super invested and interested in it, which, you know, meant it's very well made. And again, I was just kind of like, oh, I didn't know this existed. So I started looking into more of his videos when I got home. And I think he had a video on Shenmue and Duke Nukem, I remember watching. And I wonder if already he had done Panzer Dragoon at that time. I forget the timeline for his videos. But yeah, I was just kind of like, okay, well, this dude is doing, you know, really good work. Probably the best I've ever seen in terms of like video documentary stuff. So this is great. And I was just kind of curious, who is this Dark 1X guy? Wasn't active on Twitter or anything, so like I couldn't really look up too much about him. But it just so happened that we were both members of a bigger video game forum at the time. And I don't think it exists anymore now, or has turned to the dark side somehow. But we were on that, and I saw there was a thread about his latest video, which I forgot which one was. But in there, I was just kind of curious what people thought of it, and, you know, of course, they all praised him, as they should. But I saw John post it, and I was like, oh, so he's actually part of this forum. Interesting. And he mentioned that he was very burnt out, and that, you know, he kind of just felt like he was striving for something more, but couldn't quite get there. And I was like, okay, so I know how this feels, and my VV's, my partner's advice echoed in my head. So I was like, for some reason, I usually don't even contact people much, but for some reason I just felt compelled to kind of tell him, like, hey, you know, I saw this Soul Reaver video, I saw the Shenmue video, and I really enjoyed it. I used to do something similar, but it's really cool to see that, like, you do it 100 times better than I ever could. So, like, just want to say, like, really appreciate your work, and I hope you feel better. I've dealt with burnout myself, and I just kind of gave him, you know, my support. Nothing special.
But he responded, and I think he was a little bit aware of me actually, and he was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, yeah, where you been? where you should talk." And so we just kind of started talking a little bit about burnout initially, but then this was right around the time that Gamescom was going to happen in Köln in Germany. So he was like, "Hey, why don't we meet up? If you're going to be there with work and I'm going to be there with work, why not just figure something out?" And I was like, maybe. I'm still very unsure about meeting people or dealing with anything. So I was like, you know what? Fine. Oh, why not? Mexican food is good. And Mexican food will become our traditional meal when we meet up. So we met at the Mexican restaurant, and man, it took probably I'd say less than 2 minutes. And we were just sitting there firing back and forth about ideas, and we were best friends immediately. He was just kind of like, "Yeah, well, that guy, and we should do this type of video." And I was like, yeah, do you know about this game? He's like, yeah. It's like, yeah, I have all that documentation at home. I did the research many years ago, talked to the creator. You should do that video. You should do that video. I can supply you with whatever you need. And he was like, yeah. So it was just an insane feast of Mexican food and ideas. So yeah, we just became immediately friends. I think, again, it was just kind of we were both very comfortable with each other because we had similar experiences. We had similar approach to what we did. And I don't know, I've just always been someone that I guess is kind of easy to talk to, hopefully. So we went home from Gamescom, and shortly thereafter he was just kind of like, you know what, why, he knew that I was struggling. I think he could tell. I haven't talked to him about it, but I'm going to assume that I think he could tell that I was very down the dumps, because I was giving him a lot of ideas. I was offering I could give him a lot, but he was like, why aren't you doing anything? Like, seems like you're capable, so why don't you come down and hang out at my place? Get some distance from your work. Just come hang out, have fun. And I remember how I had so much trepidation about going there. I told VP like several times I shouldn't go. Like, I'm gonna let him down. Like, I'm just gonna show up. I'm gonna be really not funny, not fun to be around, and just tired. And if he wants me to like help out on the video, I don't have that talent. And she was like, we really need to stop doing this and go just see him. Even if he asks and you say no, he's gonna just say okay. Then there is no disappointment. You just go and play video games then. Be 12 years old again. Have a sleepover. So I finally went down, and that trip ended up being very special because, as I said, I was very down, but immediately, John's wife Sylvie, incredible person. She's just so warm, immediately welcomed me in, and just very funny, very charming, and just made me feel at home. And I hadn't felt at home even in my own, like, that was the thing, I hadn't felt at home with myself for so long, but here was like all these people kind of like, it's great to meet you, you're so welcome here. And I hadn't welcomed myself anywhere for the last 7 years, so it was a pretty big change. It's small, it doesn't sound like anything. I'm sure people listening to this can just be like, she just said hello, but no, it was just subtle kind of welcoming, and the hug and the charming welcoming that like made me feel at ease. So at that point, I think this was around February that this happened. So John was kind of like, do you have any ideas for an April Fool's video that I could do? And I was like, I don't know. And then I was like, well, why don't we like do something together where I can help you script something, but what if you do a Bubsy video, because I'm a big fan of Bubsy. Why don't you do a Bubsy video, but the joke is that it's a real episode. You don't break character, you don't wink at the camera, you just do an episode on Bubsy, and that's the joke. And he was like, yeah, I love this. This is great. Why? Yeah, can you help with that? And I was like, sure. So I just wrote the script from right there and then, and show it to him, and he's like, yes, like we gotta do this. And he had done a video earlier where he did Resident Evil 2 with a mutual friend of ours, Alex Neal. And Alex is like this incredible wealth of knowledge on Resident Evil. So like Alex you can just tell him to talk, and he'll talk forever about it and be really good. So I was like, well, you just did that Resident Evil 2 video where you had the Resident Evil expert. You should have the Bubsy expert. And when people watch it, like, Alex is I think he's on the right side of the frame. Whoever is doing the Bubsy stuff should be on the left side of the frame. It should be like a bizarro thing where, this is subtle little detail. And John was like, I love this. Like, yeah, this is going to be amazing. Let's do it. But the thing was, I never planned on it being me, because I was like, I'm not stepping in front of a camera. I'm not doing any of this. Like, I can't do this. But then more and more as I thought about it, because I figured like we'd call like Battaglia, like his partner in crime over at Digital Foundry, just bring him up and like he can pretend. But that turned out to be kind of like a long trip for him to do, and I don't think he knew what Bubsy was. And then I thought more and more about it, and I was like, for this to work, you need someone that has no expression, has no emotion, has no ability to like show any type of bias or facial, happiness when talking about this. He should just be a dry expert.
You have to pull off complete deadpan.
Exactly. You have to be deadpan and not break character. No one else could do it but me. So I told John, I was like, I guess I'll be the expert, huh? And he's like, you want to do it? Like, I would love if you would do it, but no, not forcing you. And I was like, I guess, just for one episode of Bubsy, it would be fun. My only thing was like, well, the only thing I need from you is that you credit me as the world heavyweight champion of Bubsy. And he did.
That's awesome.
But the thing was that, like, we went up to the same spot he had done the Resident Evil video, and for whatever, as you mentioned, John is so supportive. John is an incredible person, like, behind the camera, and he's super supportive, super friendly, and he just, he never doubted I could do it, which I found kind of strange. He should never trust that I can do anything, I felt. So he was just like, all right, well, just go. Like, and I just ad-libbed everything. I just like, okay, camera rolling. Like, he sent me a question about Bubsy, and then we filmed almost all of it in one take. And it was such an amazing feeling there and then that I felt like I can do things again, just these slow steps back, like realizing that maybe I'm not that incompetent that I keep telling myself, but we'll see. I mean, I haven't seen the video yet. But yeah, so we filmed all this, and I was still just kind of like, what's gonna happen? Like, I figured that like the fan base would just be kind of like, oh, I've seen Married with Children, adding this third child, or Poochie.
right.
Like, I know who Burt Ward is. Like, I was just kind of like, oh god, they're gonna hate this. Like, they're gonna, because no one likes the friend. No one wants that. But amazingly, when that video came out, it came out right before GDC. I remember, because I went to GDC. Amazingly, when I was just, because I kind of kept away from it because I figured this is going to be so toxic. What the hell did I do? Like, why would I do this to myself? But then the day it came out, people reached out to me. It was either like, it's so good to see you back. Boy, have you put on some pounds. And, other people were just like, that guy is like funny. Like, he seems like he means what he's saying. Little did they know I did. And, it's just like this, all this positivity that I was not prepared for. So it was very emotional for me. And that was kind of the beginning, because at that GDC, I was walking around, people were like, you're the Bubsy guy. And then suddenly from behind, someone did the Bubsy voice, and it turned out to be the voice of Bubsy from the original Genesis and Super Nintendo game. So I got to meet him. It was just like an incredible time, that trip.
That's awesome.
I couldn't believe. And then the team from that did the new Bubsy, the Paws of Fury game, they approached me because they were just like, "We're making the new one. We're gonna make you happy. We're gonna make you so happy and proud." And I was like, "You already did." And so it was amazing. And then so that was the very start that of me stepping on to camera on TF. A long story, but
no, that
was the beginning.
That is really cool. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Jose Tejada, Hotego, one of the FPGA developers, and yeah, we were talking about like breaking up projects, and I made a point about small wins that I've had to remind myself on a constant basis. And I don't know if this would kind of apply to you at all, but I certainly don't mind repeating myself. Sorry for everybody listening, but you know, there were many times in my life where I'd been working on multiple projects at once that were long-term projects. And I specifically remember one time where, you know, we would have these Friday meetings and everybody would kind of get around the table at the end of the day and say, you know, what did you accomplish this week? And 3 weeks in a row, I mean, there were big projects, so nothing was finished. And I was so frustrated, you know, it came to me and they're like, "Oh, what did you do this week?" I was like, Nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I am freaking useless. I don't know why you guys keep me here. I have no business even being in this meeting. Nothing's happened. And everybody laughed.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, because everybody laughed because they know, they saw me there. They knew I was doing stuff. But that is absolutely how I felt in the moment. And then the good thing about when you have multiple projects like that is they often tend to finish at the same time. So then you have that pretty awesome, like, look at all the stuff that I just did. But that never left me. So I always try to make sure I have little wins in between bigger projects. And one of the great things about RetroRGB is, very often, the most important article of the week is just simply, don't forget pre-orders are open for this thing that everybody wants on Friday, So it's important to get those out, even though they're not as, 10 years from now, no one's going to go back and reread that. But in that moment, it's important. And then, tweet it out. Hey, everybody, don't forget about this. So I do get those small wins that remind me, like, what I do isn't useless. So I think without those, I could very easily fall into that trap. But yeah, try to remind yourself little wins.
Yeah. So, the Bubsy video was a shock to me that people actually, for one, remembered. That was one bigger shock. But second of all, just the acceptance. I never expected the acceptance from the community, and it's been incredible still to this day, the amount of tweets and stuff I get now. It's not always about the best games, as you probably know by now, but it's still funny to just see how, they regard me as someone funny and, entertaining, because I, at the time, didn't. And I really have to give a lot of praise, and, well, praise is probably not a word, but I have to give a lot of thanks to Digital Foundry as a channel, because shortly after that Bubsy video, we went to E3 together, me and John, because, we had become very close friends very quickly. So we stayed together for E3. And I met Richard Ledbetter there, and Richard is someone I read as a kid. I actually cited him in an article I did once, saying that he was an inspiration of mine because he was he was someone that was kind of dry humor, but his information was always so good in, like, Mean Machines and the official Sega magazines. So when I met Richard, I was shocked that he was the boss of Digital Foundry. I was like, "That's your boss? Like, I know who he is." And he was just kind of like, "Oh, so you're the Bubsy man." And so that was an interesting meeting. But Digital Foundry they didn't have any reason to really keep using me in any way, because I got to think honestly about it. I had just been a joke. I had been a joke in a Bubsy video for them. So, like, bringing me back for anything would seem kind of far-fetched in my opinion. But at that E3, without any hesitation or anything, they were just like, "Oh, why don't you do correspondence for us at E3? Why don't you just step in with John and, like, do this on-camera segment talking to the fans?" And I still can't believe they gave that trust to me But again, it was just these building blocks for me to kind of feel like I'm still very much there in headlights when you watch those videos, because it's still very fresh for me. But just that trust and that appreciation for the fact that I'm not the best presenter. I'm not the most good looking guy or anything, but I can get the information across. I can keep my lines straight, and I can, keep time. Except for this interview, this runs way too long. But it was amazing to see that trust they gave me, and that turned into basically a semi-regular guest appearance, because I think I was in one video per month in 2019. And they just kept bringing me back and back, and the games got worse and worse, and I suddenly realized that this was the key to it all. They just want me to play all this crap, just sink my career.
That's funny. I do have to respectfully disagree with you about something you just said. I don't think anybody that saw that Bubsy video would have thought of you as a joke. I think the opposite. I think while it was funny, I think that showed that you were able to do content in that way. So I don't, while you could say the video was a joke, I don't think anybody would have ever interpreted either of you as a joke or the butt of the joke or something. It's not like you were the guy that showed up and they dumped a bucket of water on you and laughed and then moved to the next scene. That would be different. But so yeah. I could absolutely see how somebody could extrapolate from that humor that there's actually a lot more going on there. So glad you got those small wins. Really. See, small little wins.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, for me, it was no joke. It was a very serious topic of Bubsy. But yeah, I just figured from the audience perspective, it's just like, why is the Bubsy guy back to talk about news at E3? Like, why is he relevant to all this? No. But no, they were immediately like, bring Audi back and all this stuff. It was really amazing. And over that year, it was just more and more people were just kind of like, I like Audi. I still don't quite understand why. I have no ego, but I try my best then to just treat them as friends and talk about Alfred Chicken and CDI like they want me.
The CDI. The CDI.
So
where did your love for the CDI stem from? Did you have one growing up?
No, I saw one at the electronics boutique in the glass chamber. Always tempting. Wow, there's a CD system from Philips that has a Mario game on it. Are you fucking kidding me? And it's like, and I can never play it.
Yeah.
So I just remember seeing that in like the Zelda games and some other games. Thunder in Paradise. My God, I was a huge fan of Thunder in Paradise, the TV show. And the fact that it was a video game based on it that I could not play was like the biggest breakup of my life. Like, no woman could hurt me as much as Thunder in Paradise on CDI ever did. And so, I always had a fascination for it. I always had a fascination for, as you can tell, like for Japanese home computers and whatnot. I always had a fascination for systems with kind of undiscovered, uncharted territory of libraries. And the CDI for the longest time, it's not emulated, or it wasn't for the longest time. And so I was just kind of curious about it, and I started picking up games. I never had a CDI for a long time. I just had the actual games because I saw them for like pennies in buckets at like flea markets where they probably belong, considering I play them now. And then, what started all that was just, I think John just thought it was so funny that I kind of had a little, like a shred of respect for that system. It's gone now. But at the time I was just kind of like, well, it has Thunder in Paradise. And he's like, that means nothing to humanity. You know that, right? And then, then fans started picking up on this. Because in videos, John just started kind of mentioning it, like, well, you're a CDI fan now. It's like, don't say that loud. I still have living parents. And it's like, so this is just something fans jumped on. And it's now, after 17 years in the industry, working with legends and greats, I'm here stuck talking about the CDI every week.
That's hysterical. Yeah, I got a friend of mine, shout out to Justin, a.k.a. Goodwill Hunter, scored me a ton of games. I'd purchased a couple. I purchased Tetris and Thunder in Paradise. And I think I had one other. He got me a bunch. I picked up a mouse, one of those new old stock. There's somebody in the U.S. that seems to have
Cool.
hoarded away thousands of these things. And then I now have 2 top loaders, each that have had new lasers, new timekeepers, and RGB modded. So
Oh man, those timekeepers! What great design, right?
Gross.
That's Dutch design through and through.
So if anybody doesn't know, it's a chip that keeps the time, but it also syncs things up, and it has a standard 2032 like Dreamcast VMU style battery
Yep.
in the chip. So your 2 choices are
Inside
the chip, molded around the battery. So your 2 choices when that dies is to buy another timekeeper chip and hope that the new one that you've bought hasn't been sitting on a shelf for 20 years and already has a dead battery, or to Dremel out the chip and then replace the battery that way. So my friend Jose did both of these for me. A friend of mine from Belgium actually sent me a PAL one, and then I found a super cheap one in the US like a year or 2 ago. And one of them has the MPEG card. So I feel like for a project like this, you need 2 because something's definitely going to go wrong on one of them. It's just the way it is with retro stuff. So hopefully I'll.
Oh, you're still running such a risk just having 2. Yes. Like you need a room of CDIs because they'll break for whatever reason. You look at them wrong, or you played Lucky Luke for too long. Like it's anything and it breaks. Yeah. Which I mean, how could you not love it?
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited. Thunder in Paradise is absolutely on the agenda. We're gonna have a couple others. I'm gonna have some fun with this one. You have to drop by during that. It's gonna be a live stream.
Yes, absolutely. So. Yes, absolutely. So I mean, I finally got to play it. I have a very short story I can share about Thunder in Paradise because I have the Peacekeeper, which is it's not even a light gun, it's an IR gun for the CDI. It's actually really precise for the time. Yeah, it's a blue plastic gun. I think you've seen it, right?
My friend just sent me one to borrow for this video, so I'll be able to try it live for the first time.
It's really good, actually. But what John was like, you should bring it down. We should play it on DF Play. And I was like, all right. So, but when I go to John's place, I usually just bring a carry-on. And I didn't think about this. So I went through security, and all the alarms sounded off. Just red alarms like in the cartoon shows. And I was like, oh. That's interesting. I wonder who did this. And then they came over to me. It's like, is this your bag? It's like, yes. It's like, can you open the bag slowly? It's like, sure. So I opened it slowly. It's like, what's that? It's like, it's my underpants with Ninja Turtles on it. It's like, can you remove that? It's like, all right. And then underneath was the CDI IR gun, the Peacekeeper. They're like, what's that, sir? And I was like, that's a gun for a video game console. It's like, which video game console? I've never seen that before. It's like, the CDI. And they're like, I never heard of the CDI. And I was like, yeah, it's not too common. It's like, what's some games for it? Because they were trying to figure out if I was just lying or not. It's like, instead of saying like Mario and Zelda, for some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to say like, oh, it has like Mad Dog McCree, The Apprentice, and like The Joy of Sex. And they were just like, we have no idea what any of this is. Come with us. So I had to go to a second screening room, be patted down, and then they confiscated my gun. So I had to pay $200 when I came back to get that out of confiscation. So John was like, "Why didn't you bring the gun, dude?" It's like, because I got confiscated and patted down because of that gun.
That's hysterical. The funny thing is, if there was the people of the right age group, if you had said Mad Dog McCree, like they could have just looked at that and gone, "Oh yeah, all right, yeah, okay, makes sense."
I don't know in Europe if anyone would have that reaction to Mad Dog McCree.
Really? I mean, it wasn't a good game, but it was all over the place in the U.S.
Maybe in the U.S. I could see it. I mean, this is a European airport, so I really don't know if that was the right answer to say. I think Mario and Zelda would at least be kind of like, I kind of know those names. I guess this is true, but because they were just like, you're talking gibberish. So I had to go to the second screening room. So the CDI cost, it actually, I think, ended up being noted in the local newspaper that like the alarms had gone off due to a toy gun and I almost wanted to send him a correction. It's like, it's not a toy. It's a
for the
CDI light gun. I used to be a journalist.
Oh, jeez. That's hysterical.
So yeah, that was the reason why that DF play never happened yet. Now it is at John's place.
I can't wait to see that, and I also couldn't think of a better way to end this with a freaking almost got arrested because of a CDI light gun story. So, where's the best place to find you for people that want to follow you? Is it Twitter?
Oh, it's definitely Twitter. If you go to PC98_Audi, that's me. If you want to follow me for whatever reason, and send me a question or whatever you want. And you can go to Amazon and you can buy my book there. It's Wrestling with Pixels. It's every wrestling game ever made, written about, with interviews with creators and everything. It's finally ready and out. And yeah, I guess that's the best places to find me. It would be Twitter.
Awesome.
Or, of course, subscribe to Digital Foundry. And maybe, just maybe, I'll show up there even this Christmas.
Awesome. I'll of course have links to all of the stuff for anybody, and we'll definitely do this again soon at some point. We'll pick another topic and have some fun with it.
Oh, there is a pretty big announcement coming in the coming weeks and months from me and Lindman, so I'm sure we'll both be back very soon.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, thank you very much for your time, Audi, and we'll definitely do this
anytime.
again soon.